You've been told the Roman Gladius never dulled in battle. That ancient Roman blacksmiths possessed metallurgical secrets lost to time that made their blades hold an edge better than anything we can produce today. That's not just wrong, it's backward. Modern steel would embarrass a Roman Gladius in almost every measurable way. Yet Roman soldiers cleaved through enemy ranks with blades that sometimes stayed sharp for entire campaigns, while others needed resharpening after a single engagement. The real story isn't about superior ancient materials. It's about understanding a paradox that modern blade manufacturers are only now rediscovering. Roman smiths were working with objectively inferior steel, riddled with impurities and inconsistent carbon content. Yet they engineered edge retention through techniques that compensated for these exact weaknesses. Imagine you're holding a Gladius recovered from an archaeological site. Modern metallurgical analysis reveals something disturbing. The steel itself has a carbon content fluctuating wildly between 0.05% near the spine and 0.25% at the edge, loaded with slag inclusions that would horrify any contemporary metallurgist. By every standard we use to judge blade steel today, purity, homogeneity, consistency, this material is garbage. Modern structural steel used in building girders can absorb 2.5 to 10 times more impact energy before fracturing. High-grade tool steels achieve yield strengths exceeding 1,500 megapascals, while Roman bloomery steel struggled to reach 400. So why did un-Roman swords shatter on first contact, or dull after 3 thrusts into a Gallic warrior's torso? Here's where it gets disturbing. The Romans weren't trying to make perfect steel. They were engineering around imperfection. Every Roman gladius was a composite structure, and this is the part historians rarely mention when they romanticize ancient craftsmanship. The blade's core contained low-carbon iron, soft and shock-absorbent, deliberately kept between 0.05% and 0.07% carbon content, wrapped around this flexible spine. Smiths forge-welded strips of higher carbon steel reaching up to 0.25% carbon at the cutting edge. This wasn't artistic flourish. It was material science born from brutal necessity. You need to understand what happens during combat that most sword demonstrations never show you. When a blade strikes bone or another weapon at full force, the impact sends a shockwave through the metal. A uniformly hardened blade, the kind that seems logical to manufacture, either deforms at the edge if it's too soft or fractures internally if it's too hard. Roman smiths discovered that a graduated hardness prevented both failures simultaneously. The soft core absorbed kinetic energy while the hardened edge maintained its geometry. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This layered construction was necessity, not genius. Roman smelting technology couldn't produce consistent high-carbon steel in usable quantities, so they had to weld different grades together. Chinese smiths were already producing bloomery steel with variable carbon content through superior furnace control by this same period, achieving results Roman technology couldn't match. The real secret was in what happened next, and this changes everything we thought we knew. After forging the basic blade shape, Roman smiths employed selective carburization, deliberately packing the cutting edge in a carbonaceous paste. Historical records describe mixtures containing bone char, charcoal, and even animal matter like horn gelatin. The blade edge, coated in this paste, was heated to temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius, cherry red in the dim light of the forge. At this temperature, carbon atoms migrate into the iron's crystal lattice through solid-state diffusion, enriching only the surface layer while leaving the core untouched. They'd maintain this temperature for hours, long enough for carbon to penetrate maybe half a millimeter deep. Then came the quench. Plunging the glowing blade into water or oil triggers a violent phase transformation. The steel's face-centered cubic austenite structure doesn't have time to revert to its normal body-centered cubic form. Instead, it locks into martensite, a body-centered tetragonal structure that's extraordinarily hard but catastrophically brittle. A fully martensitic blade would shatter like glass. The Romans knew this because they'd seen it happen. so they tempered. Reheating the quenched blade to around 200 degrees Celsius, you can judge the temperature by watching the steel's surface oxidize through a spectrum of colors, from pale yellow to deep blue, allowed some of the internal stresses to relax. The martensite partially transforms into tempered martensite, trading some hardness for desperately needed toughness. This is where modern metallurgists start paying attention. Because the Romans were achieving differential hardening without understanding the crystallography. They just knew empirically that a blade quenched and tempered this way would bend slightly under extreme stress rather than snap, while the edge still tested hard enough to shave hair. Modern micro-hardness testing on recovered Roman blades shows edge hardness ranging from 500 to 640 Vickers. Comparable to a good modern knife, but achieved in material that's maybe 60% as pure. The matrix contains slag stringers, oxide inclusions, and compositional variations that should have ruined the heat treatment. Except it didn't, because the impurities themselves were acting as crack arresters. Those slag inclusions everyone assumes were flaws. They prevented crack propagation during impact. A perfectly homogeneous blade transmits fracture energy cleanly through its structure. Ancient impure steels scattered that energy at thousands of microscopic boundaries. But here's what no one wants to admit. Roman blades still dulled. Constantly, the archaeological evidence is unambiguous. Roman military sites are littered with sharpening stones, and written accounts describe legionaries maintaining their weapons before and after engagements. The Gladius wasn't magically self-sharpening. It needed regular maintenance because the edge retention came from hardness, and hardness makes steel wear-resistant but not wear-proof. Every thrust into layered linen armor or hardened leather abraded microscopic amounts of that carefully carburized edge. The geometry helped extend the interval between sharpenings. AHF. Gladius typically had a 20-degree inclusive edge angle, which is fairly obtuse by modern standards, but significantly more chip-resistant than the acute edges on kitchen knives. Roman soldiers weren't sword fighting like in movies. They were punching a sharp wedge into human bodies from behind a shield wall, and that punching motion generated less lateral stress on the edge than slashing would have. The short blade length, usually 18 to 24 inches, meant the lever arm was small, reducing the torque that could twist and roll the edge during a deflected thrust. This is materials engineering through weapon design. This is the part that makes modern blade manufacturers uncomfortable. We have infinitely better steel than Rome ever dreamed of, computer-controlled furnaces producing alloys with exotic elements like vanadium and molybdenum, achieving hardness values and toughness combinations that would seem magical to ancient smiths. Yet many modern blades underperform. Roman swords and field durability because we've optimized for different failure modes. Modern kitchen knives are ground thin with acute edge angles because we're cutting vegetables on plastic boards, not piercing through human ribs. When you take a modern thin ground blade and abuse it the way combat would demand, the edge deforms or chips almost immediately, despite being made from demonstrably superior material. The Romans were solving a completely different problem, and they were solving it at the design level, not just the materials level. A gladius was never meant to hold a razor edge. It was meant to deliver fatal wounds repeatedly under chaotic conditions without breaking or bending permanently. And it needed to be field sharpenable by an exhausted soldier with a basic whetstone. That requirement shaped every choice from blade geometry to heat treatment protocols. So what actually gave the gladius its reputation for edge retention? A systems approach. The materials were mediocre. The metallurgy was sophisticated, but born from technological limitation. The geometry was optimized for a specific combat role. The maintenance protocols were drilled into every legionary. And the myths grew because human memory is unreliable and victors write the history. When Roman historians praised their weapons, they were comparing them to Celtic longswords made from even worse iron, or two bronze weapons that bent after a few strikes. Against that competition, a properly made gladius was revolutionary. But if you could somehow hand a Roman centurion a modern combat knife made from CPM 3V steel, heat-treated to 60 Rockwell with a Scandinavian grind and a micro bevel. He'd think you'd stolen it from the gods. Modern blade steel isn't just better. It's not even the same category of material. We didn't lose ancient secrets. We transcended them so completely that we forgot why the old limitations existed. The real lesson isn't that ancient techniques were superior. It's that extreme constraints breed creative solutions. And sometimes those solutions remain relevant even after the constraints vanish. So what myth should we break down next?